All right. Good evening, good evening, good evening, everyone. Just going to go ahead and make sure I share this in a couple of places and then we'll get started.
Front door opened. Front door closed.
All right. Let me just share this. All right. All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Listen, it is Warrior Wisdom Wednesday. I am so happy to be back. It feels really, really good to be back and in my element and in my zone. So, warrior womanhood is where faith, healing, and legacy meet. And this space is really designed for women of color who are ready to just transition from striving to thriving. And we do that through soul care and soul care work because it's important not only to just remember who you are, but whose you are. So it's not just about healing from emotional trauma, but it's also about remembering who you are in God's eye. And so tonight or this month, the month of October, we've been focusing on what I consider or I call my power series, which is the power of your value. So October is value, November is vision, and December is voice. I actually switched those two around because I feel like in order for you to be able to voice the vision, you first have to have it. So, really excited tonight to be talking on this space. This is absolutely one of my favorite topics to talk about, um, which is about the Azer and how God has designed women. And so, I wanted so recently I was having a conversation with a
Front
friend
door opened.
and I got my alarm going in the
Front door
background, y'all.
closed.
And I was having a conversation with a friend and I was asked whether or not I would move back home. And when I was trying to give the answer, the thing that kind of snuck out, sometimes you don't realize how you feel until you're actually either writing it or you're typing it or whatever it is. And so, as I was explaining whether or not I would um, move back home, one of the things that came up was this feeling of being unanchored. So many of you know, if you followed my story, I lost my parents in 2019 and then in 2021. So they were about 15 months apart. And when that happened, I ended up leaving my home state and moving to another state because it just felt weird for me to be there. It was very awkward. It was hard for me to be there. They were all I knew. They were my anchor, so to speak. And then when I moved to the South, I didn't have family down here in the state that I moved to. And I knew a few people that lived here, but not, solid friend connections or anything like that. So again, the feeling of feeling unanchored kicked back in. And then my marriage ended. And that was another anchor that I had lost. So we have my parents, we have moving from one state to another, not knowing anyone, not having a support system. And then also, not in the marriage ending. And I realized kind of in that moment that, wow, like sometimes we go through our situations and we're dealing with the traumas of our life. And we don't realize that at some point we start to become unanchored. We become unraveled. We lose our foundation. We lose our footing. And then we also lose our identity because we're so busy in this survival mode that we forget how to show up for ourselves. We forget who we are, and we forget how important and how valuable we are. And so that's why tonight I wanted to kind of focus on that because that really struck a chord in me that I didn't realize that at one point in my life I felt unanchored because the things that I considered to be my anchor were no longer. And what it did was it highlighted to me I was putting my anchor in the wrong place. I was anchoring myself in people, places, and things that could not sustain who I am and what I was called to do. And oftentimes we find ourselves going through the motions, going through different relationships, going through different trials and tribulations, different types of loss, grief, you name it, we're going through it, right? Especially in today's political climate, we're going through one thing after another, after another, after another. And we're realizing that the world is becoming a little unhinged. And so we're asking ourselves, where do I fit in? Where do I, do I feel safe? Do I feel like I can continue to call this place home? Do I feel like these people have my back if I have a different opinion than what the masses may think? Even things like that come into play when we're thinking about how we're anchored. But tonight, specifically, I just want to talk to women, very specifically tonight, around the truth of who you are and how you were designed. And it's actually the birth story or the origin story of warrior womanhood that will help shape this conversation tonight. And so I remember when I was transitioning, so I started with the ultimate helpmate. That's how warrior womanhood started. It started with the ultimate helpmate. And it was this understanding of how can I become a better wife. At that time, I was getting feedback from my spouse of things I wasn't doing well. And it was a lot of feedback and a lot of things that I wasn't doing well. And I had just given my life to Christ. And so I was wanting to figure out, well, how do I become this wife, this Proverbs 31 woman, and be a better mom? So it was really about how do I become the sort of the three that most women are dealing with: a parent, being a mother, being a wife, and being a woman. And so that then transitioned into the capacity coach. And the reason why it transitioned to that was because I was going through my own healing journey, and I realized there were certain things that I didn't have the capacity for. But when I realized specifically what I needed to have and increase my capacity in order to just be better at life and do better at life, I recognized that there are certain capacities that women need to increase within their own lives. But in order to do that, they needed to heal. It wasn't until I started reading Genesis and really understanding what a helpmeet or helpmate, depending on which version of the Bible you read, what it meant. And so as I was looking it up and really going into the Hebrew and the Greek and really understanding what the term helpmeet meant, I was introduced to the term Ezer, E-Z-E-R. And so what that actually meant was a mighty help or a great strength, a helper. And that was the term that he used when he was making Eve in creation, was this term, the Ezer. And what that helped me to see was the definition that God has for women is not rooted in passivity. It's actually rooted in power. And so as I was studying and peeling this back, God was reminding me, like, on this day I created this, on the second day I created this, on the third day I created this, right? And so on. And so he gets to the last and he recognizes that man shouldn't be alone and that that's not good, right? So he created, the heaven and earth, the separation, the sky, the water, the animals, all the things. And at the end of each part, he said, and it was good. And then he gets to the end and he realizes man shouldn't be alone, and he recognizes that's not good. But the two things that he highlighted to me, or he asked me, were: one, I couldn't rest until two things happened. I could not rest because I didn't want man to be alone. But then I had to create something to fill that void. And he wanted someone to come alongside man. And he was like, I didn't make an animal. I didn't make tools. I didn't make anything, in the earth that was suitable to come alongside man. And so I fashioned woman to be that helper. And when he started to break this down to me, about being an Azer. And not just, it's not just Eve, it's not just woman. He didn't even put this inside of men. He only put it inside of women when he was making humankind, when he was making us in his image. There was a part of his image that he imparted into women that resembled his strength, his wisdom, his discernment, his ability to come alongside and help. Because you see, in the Bible, he uses this term Azer not only to just describe woman, but also to describe himself and the way that he helps and the way that he comes alongside and helps to journey folks through the Bible. We'll see that in many stories. But another way he used that term was in military references. I believe there's 22 instances where he uses this term Azer. Again, it's Ezer. And when he's using it in the military context, he's using it in terms of being a battle, at being a warrior, being a fighter, being somebody who has, great wisdom and great strength to be able to make it through the battle. And so when I equated how he was using it not only to himself, but also in military context and being a warrior, he didn't change up the meaning when he ascribed it to Eve, when he made woman. So therefore, the math in my head said, oh, so women were warriors. And that's how warrior womanhood was born. So it sounds like a cute name. I always say that, but it's biblical more than it is cute. It is our biblical birthright to operate in the God-given design as an Azer that God has designed us to be from the very beginning. And it was so important to him to craft us and design us in this way that he actually could not rest until he made us in this fashion. So I want to break down a couple of truths about how women are designed, their biblical birthright, and the true value that we inherently have and we've had since our design conception. And that means that nobody can actually take our value away because it was fashioned in us during the creation of man. Like, I hope that's kind of starting to seep in your spirit. Saying to yourself, I was designed in such a way at the beginning and with such intention at the beginning of humankind that nobody can actually change it. Nobody can shapeshift it. And there was nobody before me that I'm borrowing it from, that I'm copying, that I'm competing with. Like, that's the dope part about it, is that this is the original format. This was the original intent. This was his original heart posture when he was designing women and he was bringing us into the world to come alongside. Now, that has to mean that there was something in us that man needed. And I'm not going into like the marital aspect, strictly just who our design is as a woman. So there's a discernment in us that is needed in the world. There's a wisdom in us that's needed in the world. There is a vision in us that's needed in the world. There is a support that is needed in the world from us, right? And so with the Azer, it means having a strong help or warrior-like strength. And he paired it with the term called kenegdo, and that means corresponding to. So it doesn't mean less than by any stretch of the imagination. It's saying that he's put in us this strength, this ability to be able to support, encourage, motivate, carry, envision, maximize, increase, and enhance potential alongside, to come alongside others and be able to do that for them. Because without it, there is no way that the full and complete vision can come to fruition. So you weren't made just to complete man, but to reflect, but to also reflect God's might. So when he's saying, let's make man in our image, and he's also referring to women, that there are certain things that God has that he's instilled in us to actually carry out the kingdom work that he's called all of us to do. And so you are the other half of the equation. You are not the person that comes along to a complete equation and makes it better. You are needed to make the equation complete. And that in and of itself should give you encouragement, especially if you're struggling with not feeling like enough, if you're struggling with feeling inadequate, if you're struggling with comparison, if you're struggling with rejection and feeling like maybe I'm just not cut out for this. Maybe I don't have a calling. Maybe I don't have a purpose. Just in point number one, I can tell you that that's a lie. Like the fact that you're here means that you are here to help complete an equation, a story, a vision, a purpose, a calling, right? So, point number two, the world tells you to prove your worth, right? We see that in our social media culture with clickbait, with likes, with algorithms, with all the things. And if we don't have a certain number of followers, then what we're saying can't be true. If we don't have a certain number of likes on the post, then we're not beautiful enough. If we don't have a certain number of engagement, or if we're not monetizing to a certain astronomical number off of one post, then we don't have impact and we don't have influence. And that is just not true. He didn't put us here to prove anything. He actually didn't need us to prove anything. He didn't say, man should not be alone. That is not good. Let me put woman on this earth to prove to man, to prove to the world, to prove to society that she has the right to be here. What he did was he said, no, you have the right to be here. I've given you the right to be here. I've given you the authority to be here. And now I'm just asking you to embody what I've already put inside of you. How I've already designed you. I just want you to be that. If you remember me telling my story back in 2016 of how I hit rock bottom in my faith walk, I had decided that I was going to unalive myself. And right in the middle of the act, he comes down and sends the Holy Spirit to whisper in my ear. And he says, if you could just be the woman that I designed you to be, could you be her? And I told him I didn't know who that was. Who did you design me to be? Like, what are you talking about? And he had asked me, like, just give him time to help that unfold. And I gave him that time. And so he started to reveal things to me, which is what I'm, teaching on tonight. He didn't ask me to prove anything. He didn't ask me to be the best mom. He didn't ask me to be the best wife. He didn't ask me to be the best sister, to be the best friend, to be the best employee, to be the best at everything. He wasn't asking me to perform for his love. He wasn't asking me to perform for his acceptance. He said, if I could just get you back to the original design that I had for you, you would see that your value was already established before anybody ever had an opinion. You would see that your worth was already established. Y'all, when I tell you to please get it in your heart that our God, as mighty and as powerful and all-knowing as he is, did not rest. Like he chose not to rest until he created woman. A God that could do anything that he want chose not to rest until he created woman. We were the last thing that he created before he could just rest in that. Like, I want that to breathe for a minute. Like, think about the times where you're cleaning around the house. Think about the times when you are running errands and you're trying to finish everything up, and you get to that one last thing, and your body can finally take a deep breath. It can sigh. It can rest. That's exactly what he was feeling. You are that important as a woman to be created. So the world doesn't get to dictate your worth. The world doesn't get to dictate your value. Your worth is not in being. Your worth is in being, excuse me. It's not in doing. Like, he just wanted her to exist because he knew in the way that he was designing Eve, she would come along and do the things that he wanted her to do. She would be who he needed her to be. When you forget your divine value, you work to earn what was already yours. When you forget your divine value, you still work to earn what's already yours. Imagine that. Imagine you working yourself day in, day out till you're completely exhausted to feel valued and to feel worthy when it was already yours to begin with. Like, he wrecked me with that, especially around motherhood, because we put our worth and our value in our children. And I remember him saying to me, you do know that those are actually my children. You do know that. And even more recently, he was like, when are you going to accept that they actually have their own free will? Y'all, I tell you, that wrecked me. Because as a parent, you actually, for a long time, assume their will. And you don't realize it because you're training them, as a baby, as a toddler. But when you really think about how your children were showing up in all of those stages, and I have 4, they were always exercising their free will. I'm hungry now. I want to play. I don't want to go to sleep. I want this. I want that. They were always exercising their free will. But because we were in this parenting phase of like really trying to guide them and train them, we were always trying to control that will, right? By establishing boundaries, rules, etc. But as my children started to come into their teenage years and now young adults, he's like, you do know that they're going to make some decisions, regardless of how you've trained them. You do realize that they still may make decisions according to their free will. The same way that you were making those decisions at their age. So imagine me trying to be the best mom. Imagine trying to be the best mom to people who have their own free will. Imagine me trying to work myself to poor health, exhaustion, frustration, lack of patience, all the things, for people who are going to grow up and exercise their own free will anyway. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't parent your children. I'm not saying that you shouldn't train your children. You absolutely should. But at the end of the day, who I am as Ayana, who you are as who you are, is not wrapped up in the children. It's not wrapped up in your husband. Because when he was designing you, he was already designing you with value and worth. Like you have that. That's why the Bible says, he who finds a wife, because the value and the worth is already there. When you have children, your value and worth is already there. You don't get it because it was already there. Your value and worth didn't impart in you when you got that degree. Your value and worth didn't impart in you when you got that promotion and you got that job title and you got that house and you got that car and you had that in your bank account. Your value and your worth didn't start at any of those places. It literally started when he decided to create woman and bring her into the world. So I remind you, when you forget your divine value, where it started from, you'll work to earn what was already yours. Third point, God could not rest until he made woman, right? You were the finishing touch. You weren't the afterthought. And I love this. As I was going through and studying for tonight, you were his exhale. Can you imagine that? Being God's exhale? Like, ooh, I'm not, like I can get emotional over all these things because women are so dope. Like, there was no way for Adam to procreate without Eve. There was no way for the world to exist beyond Adam without Eve. I just like that's how you know we're not an afterthought, because in us he put the womb. He didn't put the womb in Adam. In us he put the womb, specifically designed to bring forth the population. Specifically designed for that. Like, that's how much intention he has. Like, that's how special we are to him. That's how precious he holds us, that he would trust us enough, my God, that he would trust us enough as women to bring forth his people into the world. You are not an afterthought. And sometimes we get into these relationships, or I should say situationships, because I've seen a lot of posts, we've seen a lot of posts in the media where women have been treated as an afterthought. They've been unalived. They've gone missing. We've seen a lot of that in the media in the past couple of years. And where I live, I feel like there's a new story every week about some young girl, some woman who's gone missing, who's no longer with us because they were treated like an afterthought. When you recognize that God never treated you, never considered you as an afterthought, you stop showing up like one. You start showing up like intention. You start showing up like divine design. You start showing up like purpose. You start showing up like you've been called, like you've been qualified, and like you've been equipped, because you have from the very beginning. You remember that you're part of the reason why God was able to exhale and rest. Because you're that important. You don't go around thinking that you're better than everybody else. You just remember not only who you are, but whose you are. So I've been talking about it a lot this month. And that's why I teach this series in this way of value and then your voice. I mean, your value, and then your vision, and then your voice. Because if you can see your value, then you can see the vision. And when you can see your value and you can see the vision, well, then what you say comes into alignment automatically. Amen. And so the last point is anchored women create anchored legacies. So part of warrior womanhood is about generational health. Another revelation that I had along my healing journey was my children were around me a lot more than they were around their dad. And as much as I wanted to jump on the baby daddy rants, especially in moments where I felt like I was struggling, the reality is that my children were going to be more of a reflection of me than they ever were going to be of their dad. And so as much as I wanted to shift the blame and point the finger, the reality for me was that the one that I was going to point at him, I had three coming back right at me. And that meant I had to change. That meant that it was my legacy that they were carrying. And so I had to decide, do I just want to pass down money to children who were mentally and emotionally unstable, who lacked a spiritual foundation, who didn't know how to really take care of themselves physically, being in poor health, being a diabetic, not eating and taking care of my body properly? I would pass that down to my children. If I didn't work through the emotional trauma, if I didn't work through my baggage, if I didn't work through any of those things, well, guess what? I was going to pass down the habit. That was going to pass down the habits. I was going to pass down the pain. I was going to pass down the patterns. They were going to inherit that from me. And it's a hard truth that sometimes as women we don't want to admit, but we see that story play out biblically with some of the women in the Bible. We see it play out. And so when you're not anchored in the actual truth of your design, your value, and your worth, then your legacy is misaligned. And it doesn't matter if you have biological children, if you're the rich auntie, if you're the sister friend that comes by and supports. Your generation impacts the next generation. You think my kids don't see how my friends show up? You think they don't see how my sisters show up? You think that they're not paying attention to the people that I'm connected to and how they show up? And if they take a liking to somebody clapping back and doing all that, they're still impacted by it. And so when you heal, when you go through the process of actually dealing with those traumas, dealing with those truths that are hard to admit, your energy changes, the people around you changes, your engagement changes, and therefore your habits change, your patterns change, and you start passing down what I call generational health. I want to be able to pass down millions of dollars to my children, but I also want to know that they can manage it, that they won't people please and blow it all away, that they won't fear rejection or abandonment. And in order to keep people in their life, they'll pay them to be there. These are all ways that we show up, that they won't be hyper independent and this alpha woman that I don't need nobody. Honey, I need a man. I'm going to say it point blank. I enjoyed being a wife. I want that relationship. I love my children. I enjoy the relationships that I have with them. And it's a need for me. I desire that from a healthy space. Because when you know your worth, you move differently. That's just how the math works. We see all the memes and posts. I'm protecting my peace. My phone is dry. I'm unbothered. I'm in bed by 8. Cancel plans are the best plans. Like you see all these different things where women are trying to manifest this life where they move differently. Or you move differently when you know differently. So if you're operating in this mindset where you're still competing to be validated by the world, when you're moving in a way that you're still trying to find your worth and find your value in the world, well, you have a lot of work to do when you're trying to protect your peace, don't you? In fact, trying to protect your peace from that heart posture, from that worldly view, is exhausting. Ask me how I know. We always talk about how we do things to just keep the peace. And God is like, but I'm the peace. And you don't have to keep me. You just have to receive it. And I was like, you're right. You're right. I just have to receive the peace. But I'll tell you, it's hard to receive peace when you have all this unrest and unforgiveness and pain inside of you. They don't coexist. It's like oil and water. They can be in the same space, but you won't actually get the full benefit of each because they're both fighting liquids. One of them is going to have to give. They're going to have to be separated. You're either going to have to function in your peace or you're going to have to function in your pain. But there is no such thing as painful peace or peaceful pain. Being anchored is not about control. It's really about trust. Your power and peace can coexist, but your pain and peace cannot. And so you have to relinquish your pain to the power that God has given you as an Azer. Because that was your unique, your divine creation. That is how He's designed you. So I'm just going to recap those again. God's definition of a woman is not rooted, God's definition of woman is rooted in power and not passivity. The world tells you to prove your worth, but God calls you to embody it. God could not rest until He made you. And anchored women who are anchored in the truth of their divine design, create anchored legacies. The work that we do inside of Warrior Womanhood is not just about your healing. It's about generational healing. Because we all stem from Eve. We are part of her legacy. And that means you too have a legacy. It's just up to you what you decide to pass down. And I remember God telling me when I was really researching about generational curses, and when He was really kind of unpacking warrior womanhood and giving it shape and giving it depth and telling me who I was going to focus on and why I was going to focus on and why was it important that I focus on these this particular group of women, and what was it about? Is it motherhood that I'm talking about? Is it emotional wellness that I'm talking about? Is it women in general? Is it Black women? Is it all women? When He was really sort of breaking it down, and we got to the crux of generational curses, because that was all the buzz about a year ago. I'm going to break this generational curse, and it still is pretty buzzworthy. I'm going to break this generational curse. It stops with me. It ends with me. I'm breaking generational curses. And he said, I want you to understand something. He's like, what happens when people start to do the work to break the curse is part of what I've called you to do is you help these women break the habits and break the patterns by healing from the pain. I break the curse. So I want you to understand your part when it comes to breaking generational curses. And maybe we'll do this as another live when I get to vision. But your job in breaking a generational curse is to break the habits and the patterns that the pain has caused. When you start breaking those habits and those patterns, God breaks the curse. He comes alongside you as an Azer, and he breaks the curse. But it starts with your work and breaking the habits and the patterns that have been passed down from generation to generation. And I wanted to offer that clarity when we say, I'm breaking generational curses. What you're breaking are the habits and the patterns that have been passed down, because by default, when you do that, it allows God room to break the curse off the bloodline. Your worth was never up for debate. You were born from divine intention. You were built with divine strength. And you were called to live from divine worth. You are an Azer. You are a warrior woman. That is your biblical birthright. And you were called by God to be this in a feminine form. I want to say that to you again. Your worth was never up for debate. You were born from divine intention. You were built from divine strength. And you were called to live from divine worth. You are an Azer. You are a warrior called by God in feminine form. Anchor yourselves in the truth of who you are and whose you are. I love that for you. I really do. So that was really what I wanted to share tonight for tonight's Warrior Wisdom Wednesday. The goal is always to impart wisdom from a real place, from a learned place, from a place of love, from a place of my own experience, and to share with you the way it was shared with me. Because once we remember who we are, nobody else gets to decide that for us. We get to reclaim that power. We get to reclaim that promise. We get to reclaim that purpose. We get to reclaim our peace. So that is tonight's Warrior Wisdom Wednesday. I thank you all so much for tuning in. If there was anything that spoke to you, leave it in the comments what really spoke to you or what maybe touched a nerve. I'd love to hear from you. The blog is also out. You can find the link on my page. I'll also drop it under this video. That's also talking about, it's the written form of what we just talked about tonight. And I just want you to remember that survival is not your legacy. We think it is. Struggle is not your legacy. Wholeness is. All right? So until next time, I always wish you love, light, and legacy. And as always, reach out. And if anything touched you, just drop it in the chat. I'd love to hear from you. All right. Have a great night, everyone. Take care.